Zach, welcome to Real Vision.
Hey Ash, how you doing?
I'm doing great. For those who don't already know, Zach is a managing editor, deputy global news editor, in fact, at CoinDesk. A lot of things that are happening in the space. We're going to do this one just kind of freestyle. I know you cover the space very closely. What's on your mind? What are you looking at right now?
There is so much going on, so it's always a challenge of what to prioritize and when and how, right? So anything from Bitcoin's Taproot upgrade over the weekend to Paul Tudor Jones' latest pronouncement on Bitcoin as an inflation hedge. We're doing our best to get that on the record in a way that's smart, accurate, and fast, and that is a nonstop challenge. So yeah.
Well, let's start with Taproot. As you point out, over the weekend, the voting took place. Let's give a little bit of a context for that. For those who don't know, Taproot is the new upgrade to the Bitcoin core architecture. You've been covering this for some time. What's the 50,000-foot overview for people who aren't following the technology as closely as you are?
Yeah, great question. I mean, the thing that stands out to me is sort of the privacy enhancements that are inherent to Taproot, right? So all transactions are kind of recorded to the Bitcoin blockchain in the same fashion, whether they go through a coin mixer or otherwise. So I think that's potentially like really interesting in terms of some of the philosophical trade-offs that represents, right? Added privacy, added utility of a system that was designed to be digital cash. But on the other hand, and I think there's going to be some more reporting on this, does that necessarily make the work of, blockchain sleuthing firms more difficult, right? Would the Colonial Pipeline ransomware be able to be retrieved had Taproot been in place, and these firms would not have been able to track some of these illicit funds? So I think that to me sort of stands out as sort of like the interesting sort of intellectual side of what Taproot represents. But of course, just the governance of the Bitcoin protocol is also interesting in and of itself, right? The slow moving governance around making these decentralized decision-making processes, from the miners signaling their support to people updating their nodes to developers building the stuff into the Bitcoin infrastructure. Just interesting to look at that as well, I think.
Yeah, let's walk through it because it's such an interesting point that you bring up. The way this ecosystem works, obviously multiple stakeholders, miners, obviously owners of Bitcoin, the infrastructure players. Give us a little bit of the overview of how that works and how this Taproot, I think it was a 90% threshold that they had to reach among the miners or thereabouts. Tell us a little bit about what that ecosystem looks like and how you think about it.
It is an interesting ecosystem to wrap your head around, right? And each stakeholder there plays a part. What we saw over the weekend was in the mining stakeholders signaling their support of something. And now we have until a specific block height, I believe it's in November, for folks to kind of upgrade their nodes. And then again, there's that secondary step of, actually building this upgrade into the things that Bitcoiners use day in, day out. So thinking about this multifaceted sort of ecosystem of players, which can be hard to sort of visualize at times, and it's taken me as an editor a long time to sort of visualize the different stakeholders in this network. I think what Taproot is a good opportunity for folks to start learning about that, right? We're in this middle of this sort of just this massive wave of interest in Bitcoin and digital assets. And now I think people are starting to sort of dig into these topics for the first time for many folks. So what CoinDesk seeks to provide is a great resource for people learning about the space to go to the site, dive in, and sort of consult years of back reporting, looking at some of these issues a bit more in depth than, the mainstream press would be able to, or even other crypto native outlets. So, yeah.
So we waded a little bit into the weeds there. What does this mean for the average Bitcoin holder? Why is it significant?
Absolutely. So, Taproot represents potentially greater usability and scalability of Bitcoin at one point, smart contracts being a thing that has differentiated Ethereum from Bitcoin for a number of years. But really, when it comes down to it, the tech here is only important in so much as it works, right? In so much as the network continues to operate. And I think that we get to sort of see the process unfold in real time, and it can sort of fade to the background, but by design, right? Bitcoin will continue to work, and people who are holding assets on this network should be able to continue to hold them, potentially with some added functionality down the road. But it is interesting that we can sort of abstract away some of these technology conversations for folks who may not want to dive in. And this is just sort of the meat and potatoes of making sure this network is resilient and can stand on its legs for the next however many decades.
Yeah. You also mentioned Paul Tudor Jones out with some comments now about the potential of Bitcoin to protect wealth. Give us a little bit of context on that and also what your take on it is.
For sure. So, I mean, I think a lot of people have been betting on Bitcoin as an inflation hedge, right? Inflation is something that we hear a lot about in this community, and people are rightfully concerned about it. I think a lot of sort of mainstream financial indicators are catching up to what folks in this community have been seeing for a number of months. It's going to be interesting to see if that thesis really bears out, right? We've also heard some interesting comments in the last few weeks from Kathy Wood of ARK Invest saying that, there's also a deflationary case for Bitcoin as an asset going forward. I'm not really super in the business of like having a hot take on some of these things. I'm more in sort of the chronicling of how this goes down. But to see, again, this prominent hedge fund figure come out and beat the drum about the inflation case and where Bitcoin fits in, it's going to be interesting to see if that narrative picks up a little more steam this week, I think.
Yeah, it's also interesting because this is something that we're seeing on the macro side. Obviously, raw material price inflation, we're seeing this across the board, something that we're seeing very steep increases in. So it does play into the narrative of what's happening on the Bitcoin side very nicely.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a store of value, right? I mean, this is something that is a hard asset that people really see that as being a big part of driving its value from a narrative and a technical standpoint. So as this narrative gains steam, as inflation becomes more of a concern for more people, both inside and importantly, outside of the cryptocurrency community, it's going to be interesting to see where Bitcoin finds its way into that conversation going forward.
Yeah. So Zach, what else are you covering? What's catching your eye and why is it important?
Oh man, there's so much. So I'm a big fan of DeFi. Covering DeFi summer last summer of 2020, I thought was really exciting. I think we're likely to see more activity around DeFi here in the summer of 2021. The other thing that I think is sort of a related but different story there is sort of this idea of like the base layer wars. Ethereum is by far the top dog when it comes to all these DeFi applications and other cool things. But as we saw during this most recent bull run, it kind of became a victim of its own success, right? And doing anything on Ethereum became really, really, really costly. Right. So we're seeing new experiments on new base layers that are trying to recapture some of that excitement around the cool stuff that Ethereum was able to do. And I think whether it's like Solana, we saw a huge token raise out of Solana recently. We're seeing a lot of interesting stuff there. I know Polkadot is really heating up in terms of the parachain auctions that are coming up. The Kusama parachain auctions, its Canary network is happening now. So this battle for the base layer, I think, is really interesting. Like Flow, the Flow blockchain from Dapper Labs is even starting to attract new projects. So I think it's going to be really cool to see how that shakes out. I think like the whole like Ethereum killer thing, like that's overplayed and probably not going to come to pass. But each of these networks is going to find its sweet spot, and hopefully one of those sweet spots is making DeFi more accessible to smaller holders in the ecosystem.
Hey, if you like this clip, be sure to check out the full interview and more only on realvision.com/crypto. It's 100% free. Sign up now.